Looks right around Huntley. He reaches. Oh, that ball's out. That's live. Back the other way. Sam Hubbard. The Cincinnati Kid. Hubbard's got a convoy. Chased by Andrews. At the 30. The 20. He will score.
To the end zone. Down the field. And it is deflected. And gone. Touchdown. A.J. Green.
Goes back to throw. Men are coming late. Looks right down the middle. There's Eddie Brown. He has it at the 35 to the 30. He may go 10-5. Touchdown.
Now the Bengals Super Bowl chances rest on his right foot. The kick is up. It is good.
Corey Dillon. He's gone. The knockout punch. You're looking at it. 65 yards.
And they're back to throw as the blitz is on. Goes long, intended for Collinsworth. He has it down to the 20. Touchdown. And Chris Collinsworth.
Throwing the long ball. Deep down the field. Chad Johnson's got it. Touchdown. Cincinnati.
Look at Chase go. Oh my goodness, what a gear he just found. Chase for the touchdown. Wow, Chase is on the case.
It is no fluke. It is a fact. The Cincinnati Bengals are headed to Super Bowl 56. The play clock at 3. Shotgun snap. Carr throws into traffic. Intercepted. Jermaine Pratt has the football.
Yeah.
Coffin nails.
Bam, bam, bam. How about that?
How about that? Week 15, ready to rock and roll, nearing the end of the season. Chatterbox Bengals back with you again Thursday night, as always, here to preview the Bengals' next one. And for a team that's 5-8, Craig, I think there's more storylines going on this late in the season than we even expected after the loss to the Steelers. A lot to talk about this week. A lot has happened in Cincinnati. Quotes from meaningful players, a little bit of pressure on the front office, maybe an agent change. A lot to get into today, including a preview of a must win. As you can see on the ticker, I added an extra must because just labeling things must win so far this year hasn't worked well for the Bengals. So this is a must win. And we'll get into that later in the show. But before we dive in to T. Higgins and the things on everyone in Cincinnati's mind, Craig, are we feeling good? Are we feeling optimistic? We left the Tuesday show cutting it off because you didn't want to buy in on the playoff machine live on air. I don't know what happened in between then and now, but how are we feeling about the old Cincinnati Bengals?
Well, look, I'm glad you added the extra must because
that's right. It's
any
important.
loss moving forward is legitimately knocking them out of any potential playoff race that they must have. A lot of storylines, like you mentioned, but a lot of storylines that maybe could have been avoided had they handled their business this past offseason.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll talk a little bit about that. Are things changing? If so, who's the one changing? I'm not sure that we know that answer just yet. But definitely some intrigue going into week 15, even beyond just the intrigue of the matchup with the Tennessee Titans. Some mind games going on off the field as well.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And that's what we're going to get into right here first. I know we usually bake today's show into a full preview, but with everything going on, you got to start with T. Higgins. You got to start with what's been going on in the media since we last spoke. And we did talk on Tuesday about Joe Burrow's post-game comments after the Monday night win about how T. Higgins would be back in Cincinnati, the confidence that he had in that he would be back in 2025. And it didn't seem like that was alluding to a franchise tag or anything like that. They're talking about a long-term deal and keeping this big three core of Jamar, Joe, and T together in Cincinnati for the long haul, and that seems to be very important for Joe Burrow. And as we've talked about the changes that could possibly be made in the Cincinnati organization this offseason, I've said the whole time, any major change that happens is going to be because Joe Burrow asks for it to happen. The Zach Taylor firing conversation, I think the only way that would ever happen is if Joe Burrow asks for it. Something as crazy as spending $70 million on 2 wide receivers. Maybe that only happens if Joe Burrow asks for it. And over the last 48 hours or so, he's been pretty clearly asking for it. There's not much to read into here over at Channel 9 WCPO. Here's a clip from Caleb Noe earlier today from the press conferences of Joe Burrow talking about exactly that.
If the front office isn't able to make that work, would you be disappointed in him? Would that change it?
I'd be very disappointed in that, yeah.
It's fair to say that T is a need.
T is a need, yes.
T is a need. Pretty simple. He says it right there. James Rapine asks him point blank, is T a need? There's nothing to read into here. This is point blank. You need to bring T back. It means something to Joe. It clearly means something to Jamar. Jamar doubled down on this as well, saying that T. Higgins and Joe Burrow together with him, that's a core that can get to a Super Bowl. He said, I feel like T deserves to be here, and emphasized time and time again that it is possible when asked about the money that they would both want. And my question, I guess, to Craig and what he alluded to at the start of the show, when Jamar Chase says it's possible, does that mean that the three of them have a plan in order to construct their contracts in a way that it matches what the Bengals front office wants to do? Or is he saying that it's possible within the salary cap constraints of the NFL, and it's up to the guys upstairs to make it happen for you fans? Don't look at us if it doesn't happen, because it is possible. I think both could be the case. I think we all don't have a ton of faith in Mike Brown and the ownership just because we haven't seen it a ton. But this is a new era, a new window with a lot of differences that Bengals teams in the past haven't had. I'm hoping that they're willing to change their model, especially if their star players are putting pressure on them. I don't know how optimistic I am in that. I think the likelihood of T. Higgins staying certainly skyrockets if Joe and Jamar are willing to take pay cuts as well to make that big $3 amount go down. But either way this goes, I'm more confident today than I really have been at any point in time in the last 2 or 3 years that T. Higgins is going to be a long-term Bengal. And that comes mainly from these quotes, but also T. Higgins splitting from his agent, David Mulligetta. That was big news last night, reported by Kelsey Conway first, that T. Higgins and Mulligetta had parted ways. That's huge news for Bengals fans because not only have the negotiations with T. Higgins grown stale with Mulligetta as his representation, but Mulligetta was also the agent for Jesse Bates when he left, and we know how those negotiations went. The Bengals have not had success with that agency in a long time in terms of extensions, and with all of this stuff coming together, I think T. Higgins might be a Bengal for the long haul.
I mean, I'm glad you think that, and certainly that would be an ideal situation for everybody involved, but there's a lot at play here. And yeah, I think there's certainly a world where the three of them get together and talk about a plan in terms of, are we willing to go to Bengals ownership in the front office and say, look, we want to stay together. Here's what we're willing to do. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, Bengals ownership still has to come back and agree to that. And I find it really hard to believe that T. Higgins is going to come back and say, okay, I'll take $10 million less per year in order to make that happen, right? I mean, at the end of the day, T. Higgins is still going to want as much money as he possibly can get. Sure. We all know that Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase are seemingly very good friends, and it makes total sense that they would want to stay together. There's a lot at play here, and you know, the David Mulligetta move happening the week after all of these quotes start to come out, or a couple of days later, certainly is ironic timing at best, or at worst, I guess, depending
right.
on who you ask. But you have all these things come out, and maybe it leads to a conversation with T and David, and they find out that they're not on the same page because Mulligetta's job is to get as much money as he can so that he's making as much money as possible. T's job, obviously, is to be happy and to want to play professional football in a setting where he believes that he can win a Super Bowl. And I think that's something that is really important in this whole conversation, is that the three of them likely know that the combination of Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase can and should be Super Bowl contenders for years to come if they're able to stay together. The quote that obviously takes me a step back is that during the press conference with Jamar, you know, yes, he said T deserves to be here. Yes, he said T wants to be here. But he also said, quote, it's all about how they want to play it.
Right.
And who is they? Is they the ownership? Is they the agents? Is they T and Joe? We just don't know what that means, and there's a lot to be had here and a lot of things yet to be worked out. And I go back a little bit still to something we talked about on Tuesday, and the fact that If the Bengals had just signed Jamar Chase to the extension last year, they'd be saving $5 million a year now versus what they're going to have to pay him this offseason anyway. So a lot of this could have been handled in different ways. Makes me question whether or not we still have the same old Bengals front office or not. But only time will tell, and realistically, we're not going to know until March what all of these cryptic messages really mean.
I've said for a while that I think if the Bengals were going to extend T. Higgins, they would have done it last year. And if they were really going to extend T. Higgins, they would have done it 2 years ago. And the only thing that's really changed my mindset on that is the split from the agent and the timing of it. I think if it's not T. Higgins back in Cincinnati on a relative bargain deal, I think this is the craziest coincidence of events lining up, maybe in the history of the Bengals organization. For Joe Burrow to come out and publicly say that he wants T back, really for the first time, asking for a player to come back into the media. He never really did this with Jesse Bates, at least not to this level. Certainly talked about how good of a player Bates was, but never especially used the word need when talking about him on the team the next year. And now he's doing that with T. Higgins, doubling, tripling down. And then in the midst of that, for T to split from the agent that at least all Bengals fans think is the reason these negotiations have been held up, that is a crazy coincidence, if not at least a reopening of the door, I think is a good way to put it, for T. Higgins to negotiate with the Bengals. Maybe Mulugeta had shut that door because they weren't going to reach a certain price point or whatever. I think this, at the very least, reopens that door for them to get back in the room, negotiate a contract, see about a long-term future, because I was pretty locked in on a double tag and trade to get some value out of T. Higgins this offseason. I still think the likelihood that the Bengals tag him is nearly 100%. We talked about it on Tuesday, that's the move that makes the most sense, basically a formality, because then you can still negotiate with him before he signs that tag, and then that gives you the opportunity to trade him as well while controlling his rights and not letting him just hit the open market and negotiate with everyone. So it makes a lot of sense for the Bengals to do that, regardless of how these negotiations go at the start of the offseason. I expect them to tag him either way. It's important to note, as all this stuff bubbles up, there's going to be no negotiations or any rumors of negotiations during the season, because T. Higgins can't sign a contract during the season because he's playing on the franchise tag. Jamar Chase, different story, as we've talked about all year, but even he doubled down today and said that he's not thinking about a contract or value or anything along those lines. That's off-season thoughts. I don't know how much I believe him in terms of that, but certainly not going to talk to the media when it comes to the contract during the season. So I don't think there's going to be much information about the future of this team, the wide receivers, anything along those lines until later in the offseason. I think you're absolutely right about that, Craig. We're not going to get any information in these next 4 weeks or whatever in the regular season. I do think the level of play of T. Higgins in this offense could be a big factor in how this goes in the offseason. If T. Higgins doesn't play well the last few weeks, I think there could be some people saying, well, here you go. There's your example. Don't bring him back. He disappears in games. I have a different opinion. I think if T. Higgins goes off to end this year with crazy games back to back to back, I think that lessens the chances of the Bengals re-signing him. I think if he continues to struggle a little bit, God forbid an injury, but if anything like that were to happen, it's just further driving his price down, and I think in a roundabout way that could be a positive for the Bengals. So his level of play and everything else the rest of the year is certainly interesting, and we're going to be paying a lot of attention to what number 9 says at the podium the rest of the year as well, to see about the future of T. Higgins. But I'm back on board. I fully want him in Cincinnati for the long haul. I think it makes sense at a certain price point. With all the stuff coming up, I'm getting more and more confident that price point can be met. But as I said earlier, this seems like the first time that Joe's really putting pressure on the front office. And do you think this is going to be the last thing he pressures them with this offseason? Maybe the last public thing, but I think this is a big step for Joe Burrow in terms of putting stuff out there in the public, in terms of criticizing the front office. I don't think he's I don't necessarily think he hasn't done this in the past in private, but this is the first time it's going public, and that's a big step, and I think that's going to increase the level of confidence he has in the office to talk to the higher-ups about the future moves of the Bengals, and that's what great quarterbacks do. I want Joe Burrow to have a lot of control over the moves of this team. I'm not talking about personnel, but his input should certainly be highly valued in terms of what they're going to go do in the offseason, and I think this is a great step. Do you think it's a good thing for the quarterback to be putting pressure on the front office in terms of this, and how much of that stuff would you like to be public versus kept in-house?
Well, I think that's the big differentiator, right? I mean, I think every quarterback should have a good a good relationship with the head coach and with the front office to be able to be lockstep on all of the decisions that are made across the team, at minimum across the offense, but certainly across the entire team. Makes a ton of sense. And the problem, I don't want to call it a problem, but the question becomes how much of that should be public and how much of that shouldn't be public. And for those comments to be coming out after a game where T. Higgins, quite frankly, didn't have his best game was kind of interesting to me, right? Like, we're not coming out of a game where T. Higgins goes off for 15 catches and 200 yards and scores 3 times. Oh, wait, that was Jamar Chase. Like, the fact that conversation then turned to T. Higgins and wanting to keep T. Higgins in town tells me a little bit about the mindset of this team right now. And quite frankly, it adds a little bit of wonder to why they believe that it was important to bring up in that situation. So yeah, at the end of the day, the quarterback, Joe Burrow in this instance, has to be tied into the front office and has to be tied in to what they're doing. Because if they're not tied in and they're not on the same page, the next time Joe Burrow puts pressure on the front office might be when he's asking to leave himself.
Right. 100%. That's a great point. I think that's something a lot of Bengals fans are worried about. We've heard the Carson Palmer comparisons. We saw the Monday Night Football intro where they talked about it. Adam Schefter brings it up every time he gets a chance. And I think it's something Bengals fans are starting to worry about as we continue to watch Joe Burrow get hit every single week and go up to the podium seemingly defeated after every single one of these losses. It seems like he's getting his drive, his love for the game beat out of him after some of these losses, coming up to the podium so somber, so sad, head down, just upset about the outcome of the game. And you can't blame him when he's doing all of this stuff statistically, having a historic season, and the bounces just aren't going his way until Monday night when you finally get one. And he takes advantage of it with the touchdown to Jamar Chase on that last drive. And I think that's why it was so refreshing for Bengals fans, even that being our 5th win, even with the playoff picture being a far cry away. After that game, to see him and Jamar laughing on the field, shoving the donuts in each other's face, that was great for Bengals fans to see, because our great players that have been playing so well this year, we have all the stats. Seemingly every week we have new numbers talking about how they've done something that's never been done before, talking about Joe and Jamar, and to see them finally happy after one of those historic games, I think it just means so much. And that's the biggest thing we continue to talk about. We talked about when we talked about potentially benching Joe Burrow with the playoffs out of reach. You have to keep him happy as much as you have to keep him healthy. And I think as long as he continues to echo his wants and desires for the front office should prioritize a lot of those things. And even if it doesn't go necessarily with the image of the team they had in mind, I think going with what Joe Burrow wants is crucial to the success of the Bengals, because he needs to be happy and he needs to be here. Because regardless of whether you want to spend that $20-30 million on a wide receiver 2 in T. Higgins, or an edge rusher, or a linebacker, or a safety, or a corner, wherever you want to spend that money, if Joe Burrow's not playing quarterback, it doesn't matter who else we have on this team. I mean, respectfully to a lot of those guys that are great. I think Joe Burrow's the catalyst that drives this ship, and that's not a hot take. No one's going to disagree with that. You have to keep him happy. And if he's going to sit up there at the podium week after week and say T. Higgins is a need, and he echoes it 3-4 times in a week, I think if it wasn't your plan, you start figuring it out how you can make it your plan, because keeping this guy content in Cincinnati has to be priority one.
Well, all 3 of these players know that the Bengals don't negotiate during the season.
Right.
So that's another piece of this, is that, okay, yeah, let's say we're on the same page that all of us want to stay together in Cincinnati and that the front office is on board with making it happen too. That conversation isn't happening right now, at least based on all of the reports nationally about the way the Bengals handle their business. So bringing it out now in week 15, again, just adds to the complexity of the decision to start that conversation right now, because it's not like, they did it with the understanding that, hey, we're in negotiations, we're really close on all 3 of us. Let's put a little bit of pressure on them to make it happen, and let's get this deal done before the end of the year. At least from what we understand, the Bengals don't do that. And so is it just a matter of David Mulligetta had conversations with the Bengals and didn't believe that they were going to make the concessions necessary to sign T. Higgins and basically wanted to rule them out? I don't know. But the truth of the matter is that right now negotiations are not likely to be happening. And so that just makes you wonder again why this conversation is happening now. And I would love to believe, you mentioned it, like we talked about it on Tuesday. I don't see a world where T. Higgins isn't tagged, right? Like even if it's a formality, you have to tag him, because you have to make sure that he's not going to go out and just not give you a chance to match a deal. But At the same time, what does that do for the relationship to get that tag, knowing that, hey, I thought we were really close and now you're just going to put the tag on me? There's a lot of psychology that goes into it in a lot of these conversations behind the closed doors. And quite frankly, how many of these conversations are able to happen before that franchise tag deadline will be interesting to see. And part of it will play into whether or not this team makes the playoffs. And part of it will be, can they make any noise in the playoffs? Because that could potentially lengthen or shorten the window as well.
I think that's a good point that we also touched on Tuesday with all these players coming up. Jamar Chase coming up for a contract extension. T. Higgins obviously playing on the franchise tag this year. You have to deal with that this offseason. Maybe not the worst year if you're looking for a silver lining as a Bengals fan to miss the playoffs, because that just extends the window that you have to negotiate with those players. And we already know it's going to be an uphill fight with what the Bengals ownership is dealing with financially, or at least leads us to believe they're dealing with financially. So they're going to be struggling to get that money all, where it needs to be in order to get these negotiations done. So the extra few weeks or months could be big for the Bengals. So if you have to take anything, if and when we inevitably get eliminated, take that, because I think that could potentially help. But something I do see in the chat being brought up a lot, and I think a big point around the T. Higgins discussion as a whole, people keep saying that this front office they draft wide receivers well and they struggle on other positions. So why not move T. Higgins, draft another T. Higgins, if you will? And I'm not putting words in your guys' mouth. I know you don't necessarily mean the instant production, but draft another productive wide receiver too to replace T. Higgins, and then use that money elsewhere, because we struggle drafting other positions. The one question I would have for that is, are the Bengals really that good at drafting wide receiver? Or did they get a couple generational prospects that fell into their lap? Jamar Chase at 5 wasn't exactly a reach. I know it was a debate between him and Penei Sewell, but certainly a blue chip prospect. No one had a doubt until some people said he was playing in the XFL that he was going to be a great NFL receiver, and he certainly has turned into that. Even before that, if you want to go off Duke Tobin's resume, A.J. Green, there was no debate about whether or not he was going to be good. A top 10 pick out of Georgia, one of the best receivers in the SEC, a legitimate debate between him and Julio Jones as who was the better wide receiver prospect going into that draft. And then T. Higgins, the other one everyone hangs their hat on, and basically a consensus first-round pick that the Bengals got at 33. Fell out of the first round, and the Bengals pounced on it. Kudos to them for, striking gold on those picks. Plenty of teams mess up on top picks, but I don't necessarily give the Bengals a ton of credit for the way they've been able to draft wide receivers, just because Jermaine Burton, Andre Yoshivas, who's been a good piece to this team, but certainly not someone that we think can step into a wide receiver 2 role next year. Charlie Jones, none of these guys are blowing the doors off in Cincinnati when it comes to wide receiver development or progression as a young player. They're really, sitting there as nothing but gimmick guys, if you will. Jermaine Burton now returning with Charlie Jones out. Charlie Jones predominantly a return man when he's healthy. Yoshivas a red zone threat, but that doesn't really provide much else, though he's taken a decent stride this year. I'm worried about the Bengals' ability to draft and develop wide receivers, and I think the fact that we have 2 really, really good ones in the building right now, that could be something that you just have to hold on to, because it's not a given that they're going to be able to get another one of these guys.
100%, it's not a given. And quite frankly, there's so many different holes on this team, and we've talked about this time and time again, that to have to dedicate a draft pick to hoping to hit a replacement for T. Higgins versus just paying him is the ultimate decision, right? Mm-hmm. Do I go out and do I give T. Higgins the $30 million a year or whatever that he's going to be asking for on the open market to make sure that we don't have to worry about who's going to be wide receiver 2 next year? Or do I go out and I trade him and I pick up another second rounder, and now I'm drafting hoping to replace T. Higgins? Oh, by the way, I need 2 guards. I need linebackers. I need safeties. I need interior defensive linemen. I need maybe a cornerback, like all of the different holes on this team, versus being able to go out and sign. And the obvious next question, we have it on the list here, is where's the money? Well, as it sits today, the Bengals are projected to have about $160 million to spend this coming off season, and that's including the 5th-year option that they already picked up on Jamar Chase.
A lot of people forget that.
$8 a year. So it's not like you have to go out, pay another 20 to Jamar Chase, then you have to pay 30 to T. Higgins, all of that. You're going to be adding the $30 million or so for T. Higgins to that number, but that still leaves you with potentially $140 million to be able to go out and try to replace guys. And as you look at the free agency list, there's not, knock on wood, there's not a ton of like big names on this list that you're going to be losing in terms of guys that absolutely are irreplaceable, right? Certainly guys like BJ Hill, you hate to lose. Mike Hilton's been a really good cog in the nickel for several years now. Trent Brown, Akeem Davis-Gaither hasn't necessarily shown the ability to be the starter. I think Mike Gesicki is a target that you try to bring back. Cody Ford, if you can get affordably, would be great to come back. Joseph Asai is a free agent. But you go down the list, and it's just not like there's a ton of names where you're like, oh man, well, we're going to have to spend a ton of money to keep him. So we can't sign T because we need to keep BJ Hill or whatever it may be. You're going to be able to go out and add other veteran pieces in free agency with the room that you're going to have. And there's going to be plenty of people out there on the free agency market that you're going to be able to add affordably to be able to complement the move that you make with keeping T Higgins around. So again, just playing this out with new money and everything else. Let's say that you're adding $70 million next year to the not even $50 million with the two wide receivers in terms of new money. That still leaves you with plenty of wiggle room to be able to go out and sign guys with the other $110 million. And quite frankly, that's plenty of money to be able to make a pretty good dent. You've got guys like Trey Hendrickson still under contract. Orlando Brown is still under contract. Sheldon Rankins and Sam Hubbard are both cut nominees. That would save you $24 million right there. Alex Kappa would save you another $10 million there if you went and cut him. So that opens up so much money. Right there is your $30 million that you need for T. And it's guys that everybody in this chat and everybody listening to this podcast on Friday morning would agree are probably guys that don't need to be around next year anyway. So I don't necessarily buy into the idea that there's not enough money to make this happen. There's plenty of money to make this happen and to still supplement with some of the other holes while going out and hopefully being able to draft some guys that can make an impact on this defense for the first time in several years.
For sure. And that's the biggest thing with or without signing T. Higgins. You have to hit in the draft because even if T. Higgins does walk and you don't have that $30 million-ish on the books, you're going to have to spend money on a wide receiver. We can't go into next season with Jamar Chase, Andre Yoshivas, Charlie Jones, and Jermaine Burton. That's not an option. So if you want to focus on the draft to replace the defense and the other holes on this team, then you're going to have to spend a decent chunk on a wide receiver. And I think once we do have this conversation and we come full circle, then the question is, if you're spending money on a wide receiver, why not spend it on the one that's pretty good and already is here? I think that's where it all comes back around to, because you are going to have to spend on a wide receiver too. And the options really aren't great in free agency. I know a lot of people are talking about the draft, but that is an option. But with only 6 picks this year, I don't know if spending one on a wide receiver too is the best, because especially if you're going to use a first or second round pick, those are when you're going to get the instant production starter type players, and the Bengals need those at a lot of different positions. I mean, the best guys on this list are coming off serious injuries. Stephon Diggs, Chris Godwin at the top of this list, and then you're getting into 30-plus-year-olds and Brandon Cooks, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper. This isn't a great free agent class at wide receiver. If there were some mid-level guys that we could attack for bargain prices, then maybe I'd have a different tune on this, but the money's going to have to be spent either way. I'm not going to give the Bengals a lot of grace if they go into next year with a ton of cap space. So my question is, if you're going to spend that, why not spend that on the blue chip players, the players you know are really good? Take less gambles and continue to make bargain signings elsewhere. I mean, I don't think the exchange for not signing T. Higgins is the Bengals going out and dropping $25 million a year on Budda Baker or Javon Holland at safety. I think they're still going to go the bargain signing route if they don't sign T. Higgins. I wouldn't expect a major splash for an outside free agent, which is just a shame to say. That's what we should be debating, is where to spend the big splash money. But I think the only option for the Bengals to make a big splash is in T. Higgins. And I think the trade-off we're making there is maybe 3 mid-level signings in T. Higgins instead of 5 mid-level signings. I don't expect the Bengals to go out and make some kind of big move. And with the 150-plus cap space that Craig just said we're going to have this offseason, I think it makes it pretty easy to talk about. And then you have to get into the guaranteed money. And that's a whole different discussion, because these guys are going to need guarantees in their contract, and that money's going to have to go into escrow. And it's not just these two that are going to need guarantees in their contract. It's any free agent that you're going to have bringing in, you're going to have to guarantee them some money. That's my concern, is even though it all works in the cap, will it not work in terms of what the Bengals have available? Will they be willing to go out and I don't know, change the way they structure contracts in order to bend this stuff into the way that they can operate, or maybe take loans, which they've been anti-doing before. Another thing that's popped up in the NFL over the last couple days is the ability to sell some stake in your team to private equity. We've already seen the Eagles and Jeffrey Lurie, as well as the Bills, sell some percentages of their team for more cash on hand, some private equity. These owners are not losing any control of the team. The Brown family would not give away any control, but it would be more cash on hand from businesses that are willing to invest in NFL teams. And if there's a list of 32 teams and you had me pick which one needs this the most, it's the Bengals. And of the 32 teams, only one team voted against this, and it was the Bengals. So I don't know if they're going to use this that now that it's been cleared, but they certainly should. And I think if they do, it would change the conversation around this offseason quite a bit, because then the concerns about having money to put into that for guarantees would kind of go away. Would you expect the Bengals to do anything along those lines like we've seen other franchises do, or just kind of stick with their ways and have the Brown family at 100%?
Well, I don't know why you would expect any sort of change at this point, right? I mean, you've had years and years and years of experience to tell you that that's probably not what's going to happen. And I think one of the things, and I don't want to get too deep into this conversation right now, but you're much more educated on this than I'm going to be, and so I'm interested in your take. As I look, and I get the argument, okay, well, you can go replace T in the draft. As I look at it, right now the Bengals are slotted in at number 11. Now, hopefully they can win a couple games over the next 4 weeks to change that. Maybe people would prefer they don't. I don't know. But at that point, you're basically talking about maybe stretching for a guy like Luther Burden, right? Who realistically is expected to be in the bottom third of the first round.
Yeah.
Isaiah Bond, some people have up there. So realistically, the first round wide receiver, at least like clear cut stud wide receiver, I don't know that is necessarily there. There's a little bit more talent that's expected to be second round level talent that maybe you could try to go there. But I think I heard you that you're not really in on Io Manor. I think there's some other guys, Trey Harris, that are projected in the second round. I don't think Igbuka gets down to the Bengals in the second round. But like, let's put your Duke Tobin hat on.
Okay.
And let's say you don't sign T. Higgins this offseason for whatever reason, and you do decide you want to target a wide receiver in the draft. Who's a realistic target that's going to be available either in the first or second round to be able to replace him and get that kind of production out of a wide receiver 2 that isn't a gamble? There's not really that clear-cut name to me.
Right. No, and that's the issue, is there really isn't. And especially if you're trying to replace a T. Higgins body type or what he gives you in the pass game, none of these receivers in that range for the Bengals really do that. The dream scenario, if you're going draft to replace T. Higgins, was to lose a lot of games and get high enough to take Tetairoa McMillan, the Arizona wide receiver, projected to be a top 5 pick, top 3 pick some places, the number 2 overall prospect on PFF's big board. He's 6'5", 215, does really everything T. Higgins does really well with some more top-end speed. I think that's a really, really exciting player, but now with the Bengals beating the Cowboys, as I've said on Off the Bench, that does away with the draft talk for me, because just with the way the board's setting up, there's no ability to really climb high enough to take one of the locked-in superstar players, and I don't think that's going to be an option to get up the board high enough to take a McMillan. Luther Burden and Emeka Egbuka, I think both would be interesting players for the Bengals. I'm not nearly as high on Burden as a lot of people are when it comes to the draft board. I think Egbuka will be a really, really good slot receiver, but I just don't think that's necessarily what you're trying to attack for the Bengals in terms of replacing T. Higgins. A route that I do think is really interesting, and I've seen some people talking about, a guy that I'm really, really high on out of Bowling Green, Harold Fannin Jr., 6'4", 230, the tight end, leads the country in receiving this year. I think that he should win the Mackey Award later tonight. They're going to give it to Tyler Warren, and Tyler Warren's going to be the first wide receiver or tight end drafted in this draft class. But Harold Fannin Jr., the PFF's top-graded tight end, he's going to break or get really close to breaking the tight end single-season receiving record and receptions record. He's full-on a power slot wide receiver. I think he can be what Brock Bowers has been for the Raiders this year. Another guy that I think could play that role is Eli Stowers, the Vanderbilt tight end. He tore up my Alabama Crimson Tide earlier this year, and I think he could have a lot of similar production for the Bengals. I think going the tight end route to replace a big physical receiver like T. Higgins could be interesting too. I just don't think a wide receiver's there. And then you're talking about a third, fourth round pick maybe on some of these guys, which would make it really interesting and still keep some value higher up in the draft for instant impact players at other positions. So that's definitely an interesting way to go. But I still lean that the best option as a wide receiver too, with where the Bengals are picking now, the free agent class and everything along those lines, the best option is just re-signing T. Higgins.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, just just to mention it, just because it's worth it for those people that are interested. Round 3 graded wide receivers, or wide receivers that are expected to go in that kind of realm. Xavier Restrepo from Miami, Jalen Royals from Utah State is in that realm. Tez Johnson from Oregon is in that kind of area. But again, when we're talking about guys to replace T. Higgins, I just don't know that there's that name that stands out to me, like you mentioned, where, yeah, I feel comfortable letting T walk because I feel like I can go out and we can make it work with X player. And obviously a lot will change over the course of bowl season and Senior Bowl and into the combine. But as of right now, as it sits, again, I'd rather have the sure thing, the bird in the hand, than one in the bush.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that is funny, as you talk about Senior Bowl and all things along those lines, the one Senior Bowl wide receiver I would be okay with drafting as the T. Higgins replacement isn't anyone that high in the draft. It's Jaden Higgins, funny enough. Higgins, the Iowa State receiver. He's all the way down in the 130s for PFF on their big board, but 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns this year, and that's coming off a 1,000-yard season a year ago with 6 touchdowns. And 10 touchdowns his sophomore year, the year before. So certainly a red zone threat at 6'4". He can kind of play that role that we would be losing. So I think it's interesting to look there and even go later in the draft. And if you fall in love with any of those guys, maybe that does open the door to let T. Higgins walk. Or I mean, in a trade to get some draft pick value back for them, maybe you attack one of those mid-round receivers if you fall in love with them. But certainly talking rounds 1 or 2, which is where you want to live to replace a guy with the production of T. Higgins, there's no one there that jumps out to me, which makes it really, really scary if you let him walk, because we've seen Zach Taylor call an offense with one elite wide receiver, and I'm sad to say that sucker doesn't work. So I know Josh Allen's doing it with whoever playing receiver. I know Patrick Mahomes traded Tyreek Hill, but in this system, with this coach, you need 2 wide receivers, and Joe Burrow's making that known, and I think that's a big point. So whether you let T. Higgins go or keep him here, you need a second wide receiver in this system. So whatever way you do it, that becomes a major, major need of the offseason if T. Higgins walks. And with all the needs everywhere else, I'm not sure that that's the best route to go for the Bengals. But that's enough offseason talk for today, Craig, because believe it or not, we are still in the regular season. We're still playing games, and we're still alive for the playoffs. And the Bengals, for what feels like the billionth time in the last 5 or so years, are going back to Nashville to play the Titans, a 4.5 5-point favorite, depending on where you look, on the road this week in Nashville. And the first thing, that number jumped off the page to me when I saw it, because boy, oh boy, that feels low.
4.5 feels extremely low for a team in Tennessee who's not good defensively and is terrible offensively.
Right.
I mean, the Tennessee Titans average 17.5 points per game. So you're essentially saying either the Bengals defense is going to give up a lot more points than Tennessee averages, which is probably likely if we're being honest. But you're also saying that the Tennessee defense is going to be able to hold this Bengals offense in check. And I just don't think that's realistic. 4.5 seems way, way low to me personally. I'm really interested to see what happens, though. I mean, we talk about guys in the secondary have really struggled, right? You've got a Tyler Boyd revenge game on deck for sure. He 100% is going to catch like 8 balls magically this week.
You're definitely right.
It's just the way things go. I mean, I don't care that he has 33 total catches for 317 yards this year, 0 touchdowns. That's changing this week. The dude's going to find a way. He's going to basically get up to 40 catches, 400 yards, and a touchdown. The other pieces, they have a Okonkwo at the tight end position. We've struggled. The Bengals have struggled to guard tight ends. Chig's a pretty decent tight end, or has been historically. So there's certainly world there where he could come in and do some damage. But The one that I'm really worried about is Nick Westbrook-Akine, right? I mean, he's a
All he does
deep
is catch
threat,
touchdowns.
heavy hitter. All he does is catch touchdowns, 21 catches on the year and 8 touchdowns. He's averaging 18.3 yards per catch this year. And this Bengals defense has really struggled against guys who are taking the top off on multi-move routes. I'm a little worried about what Nick Westbrook-Akine is going to be able to do. But at the end of the day, we're still talking about Will Levis. And I know that you had the conversation this morning on Off the Bench, but Will Levis is not that good. The Bengals defense should be somewhat familiar with Brian Callahan, but at the same time, Brian Callahan is somewhat familiar with the Bengals. So it'll be just an interesting all-around matchup. There's a lot of guys that played in Cincinnati that are now with Tennessee. Obviously mentioned Tyler Boyd already. They also brought in Chidobe Awuzie to be on there. It's going to be a closer game, I think, than what it should be, just because of the familiarity.
Yeah.
But 4.5 is crazy.
Crazy. I thought the same thing. I had the exact same reaction, but I guess it is just kind of a perfect recipe if you really look at the rosters. I mean, getting deep down into it, the weakness on this Titans defense is the edge rushers. They have an elite interior in Devondre Sweat and Jeffrey Simmons. They have the number 1 passing defense in football, 175.5 passing yards allowed per game. That's the lowest in all of football. They have the number 2 total defense in terms of yards allowed. And what's the Bengals' weakness? The interior of that offensive line. I'm really worried about this matchup. I think it could become a problem if the interior is able to wreck this game early. Jeffrey Simmons and Devondre Sweat, a guy that I really wanted in Cincinnati, that could be a problem. And then offensively for the Titans, I think a running back that, never root for injuries, but he's already banged up, so fingers crossed he's not going to play, hasn't practiced so far this week, Tony Pollard. He's 4th in the league in rushing yards after contact, 27-plus rushes of 10-plus yards. That's 5th in the league. This guy does what the Bengals really struggle against, which is bringing guys down in open field that can bounce off some of these tackles. I would struggle to see the Bengals winning this one going away. Hopefully they're able to cover the 4.5, but I am scared about this matchup a little bit more than I was originally. But after I saw this number and was shocked, I looked at some of the numbers, and I'm worried about these guys lining up against ours. Jamar Chase did say today that he's excited to go up against Chidobe Awuzie. Obviously, a lot of familiarity between the two of them in practice over the years, now finally on other sides. So we'll see how that goes. And we know that he can always take over a game. He certainly did against top defenses throughout the year so far. So it could be the same against the Titans this week. But the Bengals have struggled against these low-level teams with decent defenses or higher-level defenses. The Giants stick out to me earlier in the season. A close win there, 17-7 against a team that really struggles offensively but has some guys on the defense, especially in the interior. And then you go to Cleveland, 21-14. I know that defense hasn't been exactly what it has been in the past this year, but still a lot of respectable players on that unit. And the offense struggles in that game, still able to get the win because it's not the best team, but this is the type of team, I guess, even though they've been able to sneak wins, that the Bengals have struggled with so far this year. So I'm not necessarily overlooking the Titans, though it should be a fairly easy win.
Well, I think there needs to be some context here, Jacob. I mean, you brought up the fact that they gave up 175 yards per game in the passing realm, but let's not forget, they did that against the Commanders, who won the game 42-19.
Yeah.
Jaden Daniels didn't have to throw the ball. They did it in a game where Jared Goff beat them 52-14,
right,
and Jared Goff threw for 85 yards.
Yeah.
Okay. When they played Miami, Tua was hurt and didn't play. When they played Green Bay, Malik Willis was the starting quarterback. Josh Allen threw for 323 yards against him. So let's put some context here. And I think sometimes when you really dive down into the data a little bit more, it really shows a little bit more about the realistic picture more than just looking at the overall picture, right? I mean,
yeah, no, you're definitely right.
You look at some of these games and some of these stat lines, and it's kind of crazy. Caleb Williams starts his career going up against this Tennessee team and only throws for 104 yards. Aaron Rodgers, 170. Green Bay, 204, like I mentioned with Tyler Huntley. Miami, Tua was hurt. Indianapolis only got 95 yards against him. But then you get into teams like Buffalo and Josh Allen, who are able to put up significantly more yards,
Yeah.
323 yards against him. Like, there's room to take advantage of this secondary,
This
and
is
there's
a 3-10
room.
team. They're not great. My
Yes.
worry is just the things that they are better at than others are the places that the Bengals either want to attack offensively or do struggle in those regions.
Yeah, 100%. But I don't think. Well, I guess we'll see, right? I mean, you mentioned it before. This Titans front defensive line should be good enough to get some pressure up against Joe Burrow. They run a 3-4 with Tavondre Sweat in the nose, Jeffrey Simmons on the right, and then Sebastian Joseph Day lining up on the other edge. Kenneth Murray, who has been a solid linebacker, leads that crew along with Harold Landry. Their safeties are not great, and their corners are not great. We talked about Awuzie already. Darrell Baker Jr. And Roger McCreary are the other corners, and then Darrell Worley and Amani Hooker are their safeties. So just not outside of the D-line, I'm not overly concerned about it. Certainly expect them to get some pressure, but I can't remember if this Bengals team has really gone up against a true 3-4 recently. Can you remember if they have done that and how they managed that? Where the Giants weren't technically a 3-4, were they?
No, because the Giants have a Z's on the other edge because they bring down both linebackers.
Right.
The Chargers aren't. We know Pittsburgh's not. Is Dallas with Micah and Oso Digizua in the middle? Is that kind of a 3-4?
Maybe.
I'm not entirely sure. But certainly an issue for the Bengals offensive line to go up against something that isn't standard. But you talked about it there. It's going to come down to pressure on Joe Burrow and how he's able to manage that. And that's a perfect segue. Maybe you did it on purpose for what I wanted to show, because it doesn't matter, actually, believe it or not, whether you pressure Joe Burrow or not, because he's going to be better than everyone else regardless. This graph shows on the x-axis on-target percentage of throws with no pressure, on the y-axis the on-target percentage of those throws when pressured. As you can see all the way up there in the top right, that's Joe Burrow in the Bengals B, as he is in most quarterback graphs at this point in the season, pretty far removed from everyone else. So just further example of how special this season is for Joe Burrow, and that it doesn't really matter what is being thrown his way. He's able to be the league's best or among the league's best, which is incredible to find and have at such a consistent level with such inconsistency around him. I know Jamar Chase has been a Triple Crown favorite this year, but a lot of those yards have come in 4 games, and that's been great, and I love that. But Joe Burrow has been able to put together really a straightforward season with T. Higgins missing time, Jamar Chase having a couple off games, a banged-up offensive line that, when healthy, isn't even very good. So I think it's important, as we do every week, to give credit to number 9, because somehow, some way, there's always some people trying to take it away. Shout out Shannon Sharp. But he found a way to do the same thing to other quarterbacks this week, which was fun. He was telling a 44-42 loss for the Bills, where Josh Allen scored 6 touchdowns. He said that fell on Josh Allen as well. So at least he's consistent with his stupidity. But the rest of us know how good Joe Burrow's been and how much he means to this Bengals team. And he's going to have to mean more this weekend, because we've talked about it before. Another loss ends the season, and there's no more paths. They can't add another must to the must win. This is it. The Bengals have to win the rest of their games in order to stay alive for the playoffs, and even if they do that, they're not a guarantee. Only 12, 13% if they win out to get into the playoffs would need significant help around the league. But all that comes to an end if you lose on Sunday, and wouldn't that be a shame to have such a promising season? Even though it's been a disappointment so far, I don't think it actually sets in until that number hits 0. So hopefully we can dribble this out a little longer, Craig. I know we both said that the number surprised us, but I don't think that means either of us are going the other way, right? You're not picking the Titans plus 4.5.
No.
Okay,
no.
Good.
I am not picking the Titans plus 4.5. No. Don't worry about that. The over under at 46.5 is interesting to me. I kind of, and again, I could be completely wrong. I see this game ending up somewhere in like the low 30s to 13 kind of game, like 31 to 13 kind of thing.
I don't hate that.
Which puts it right in line with that. I think if you put me on the spot, I'm taking the Bengals minus 4.5, and I'm taking the under 46.5.
I like that. I've learned my lesson early in the season when I lost a ton of money on Bengals money line and spreads and these blown games that I'm just going to take the over when the Bengals play because that usually works. So I'm going to take the over in this one and the Bengals -4.5 because they got to win. And I'm going to back them until I can't back them anymore. The last couple things I wanted to talk about today, another interesting quote that came across, and it's not really a Bengals topic, but a Bengals topic gets us there, so we'll use it as an excuse. Jamar Chase was asked about the most electrifying player in college football this year, Travis Hunter, two-way wide receiver DB for Colorado, projected to be the first pick in most mock drafts. Jamar Chase says Les Miles, the old coach at LSU, tried to get him to play DB, but he didn't do it. He said Travis Hunter's a crazy athlete, and he really respects what he's doing. But first off, how crazy would it be for Jamar Chase to go both ways? If Les Miles thought he could play DB, maybe Louis Anarumo throws him out there. We've seen what the Bengals are working with. Maybe we get Travis Hunter before Travis Hunter gets in the league. In these last 4 weeks, we have Jamar Chase play corner. Thoughts, Craig? Drive that price up a little bit more. Triple crown and a few interceptions?
Yeah, let's just pay him $70 million a year. We'll pay him like a top wide receiver, and we'll pay him a top cornerback. I mean, I don't see why you wouldn't do that. I mean, if you can pay Juan Soto that kind of money, certainly you can pay Jamar Chase that kind of money. Yeah. I mean, you got 65,000 people at every home game. You got the money to be able to do that, right? I mean, listen, all I took away from that is Jamar Chase kept himself from winning the Heisman.
I think you're right.
He had the opportunity to play both ways. Could have done it. Maybe would have won the Heisman. Chose not to. Instead, had to go number 5 overall to the Bengals.
As we've learned this year, all you have to do is play a ton of snaps to win the Heisman. So, Craig, what are your thoughts on that race between Travis Hunter, Ashton Jeanty, and whoever the other two are that are so far behind? Dylan Gabriel Award. Show him respect. I know.
Yeah. Listen, I think that ultimately the award is meant to be given to the best player in college football, and does being a top 10 player on both sides of the ball combine to make you the best overall player? I don't know. Some would argue that Shohei Ohtani being able to pitch and hit is really one of the reasons why he won the MVP, not this past year, but the previous year, and him being able to go both ways. So I don't know. Maybe that combines and gives you a bigger piece. But I think ultimately you look at how far and away Ashton Jeanty has been compared to any other running back in the NCAA, and the numbers that he's been able to put up. And obviously he's going up trying to break Barry Sanders' record. I would personally lean that way. His yards after carry is absolutely insane. So it's not like his O-line is just opening up crazy holes for him and he's just running because he's fast. I think realistically the ability to break tackles, his patience behind the line of scrimmage, along with his ability to break tackles, I really like him. He's going to be a top 12-ish pick, somewhere in that range.
I think so.
You would think so. I think if I was a voter, I would probably give it to Jeanty. I understand the argument to go the other way, but for me personally, I'd rather give it to the person that I think is the number one player in the country on offense, which is what this award has really been for a number of years.
I agree. And the snaps comment was tongue-in-cheek, obviously. What Travis Hunter is doing is phenomenal. He's an incredible player. I'm not taking anything away from that. What he's done is something that we really haven't seen before. But when you go through the award lists, in my opinion, and you tell me the guy's the defensive player of the year in his conference and not the offensive player of the year, and then he's only a finalist for offensive awards and not a finalist for the Thorpe, those things kind of don't mix in my mind when you're telling me he's the best player in college football. Personally, my vote would also go to Ashton Jeanty. I think the season he's had at Boise State, facing what he's gone against, every team gearing up to stop him fully, and sitting out 8+ quarters this year as well. Travis Hunter certainly wasn't sitting out in any blowouts they had. So, these two guys, it's a shame that they're in the same season because they both would be runaway Heisman winners in most other seasons.
Yeah, the fact that the Big 12 gave him Defensive Player of the Year and not Offensive Player of the Year is interesting. I think what some people don't recognize is that a lot of times there's behind the curtain conversations that happen in regards to those awards. And so my feeling is like, hey, we don't want to make him offensive and defensive player of the year. So what do you guys want to do? Because let's all vote the same way, or at least try to make sure that this goes the way that it should. So I don't know why they decided to give him defensive and not offensive. And again, you mentioned it multiple times. He's not even the best offensive player on his team, according to the votes for player of the year in the Big 12. So I don't know. At the end of the day, I think the Heisman Trophy has become a bit of a popularity contest and a bit of a big school contest. And it is what it is. I don't think it really carries a whole lot of credence. I'd have to go back through the list, but if you really think about it, Heisman winners don't even really have that good of a history of performing in the NFL. I mean, there's been a lot of Heisman winners who have gone on not to be great NFL players.
We're on a good run now.
Yeah, we are with Jaden Daniels. Caleb Williams obviously is still early in his career. We'll see. Bryce Young hasn't picked out. Devonta Smith, Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray has been okay. Baker's been good. Lamar, Derrick Henry. But then you go back, Marcus Mariota, Jameis Winston, Johnny Manziel, Robert Griffin III. That little string right there. They were fine, but they weren't great. Mark Ingram, Sam Bradford. I skipped Cam Newton on accident. Tim Tebow. So I don't know. I think ultimately it's cool to get that award, and shout out to Travis Hunter for taking it home. Allegedly, so it seems based on the betting odds. But yeah, I think Genty is probably my pick, and I think ultimately what'll be interesting is who has the better NFL career, and I think a lot of it will have to do with where each of these players land and the situation that they're put into, and honestly, I don't know what Travis Hunter is going to do in the pros. I don't know if he's going to try and go both ways, if he's going to just play wide receiver, or is he going to be a Deion Sanders type.
I think that's going to be a reflection of where he's drafted. If he's taken first overall, or someone takes him, 1, 2, 3, or top 5 or something like that, they're going to be forced to at least try him both ways, because he's not the number 1 corner in this draft class, and he's not the number 1 wide receiver in this draft class. That's Will Johnson at corner and Tetairoa McMillan, who we talked about earlier, at wide receiver, and it's not particularly close. I would say he's the second best corner. I wouldn't have him much higher than wide receiver 4 or 5, so certainly interesting. I don't expect him to play both ways full time, but I think he's a really good corner. He's going to be a corner in the league and then have packages on offense would be my guess, until or if that doesn't work, then he'll play one side full time. But if you're going to take a guy like that, top 3 or 5 in the draft, then I think you have to try to justify it by playing him both ways. And I think he's going to go that high because GMs are scared about being wrong and not taking him and having him go somewhere else and be that two-way generational player and having them look stupid. So we'll see what happens in terms of that. But I think he's certainly going to be a top 3 or 5 pick. And I see some people in the chat throwing out Ashton Jeanty to Cincinnati. Craig, if I have to talk about this, I think my head's going to explode, so I'm going to throw it to you.
Well, I mean, the short answer is that we just had a extremely long conversation about all of the holes on this team.
Right.
And I think Chase Brown has shown that he's not one of them right now. And so while Genty would be nice, I don't think the Bengals can afford a luxury pick like that at this point in the draft, given all of the holes that they have on their team. Now, that's not to say that Zach Taylor and Duke Tobin haven't been keen on taking luxury picks in the past. So it's certainly not out of the realm, but it wouldn't be my pick.
This would be the most infuriating of any first-round pick for the Bengals, in my opinion, because it's a position that not only do you have a player at that you're confident in for the long term, it's a position you have a player at that's cheaper than the guy you're drafting in terms of money, because Chase Brown's still on his rookie contract from a mid-round slot, and GNT being a top 10 pick, that doesn't make any sense to me. I think you go out and attack the running back 2 in free agency and go that route, and then you use the first round pick on someone that can make an instant impact this year. Not that GNT wouldn't, but I think we've seen already that Chase Brown is a pretty dang good option. So I know I've seen it a lot of places as well in terms of GNT to the Bengals, but certainly would not be my choice. And as this season ends, Craig and I are going to get deep into the draft stuff soon. I had it on the ticker today, but I thought I'd push it another week. Maybe we'll talk about some draft prospects next week if this week doesn't go our way. Or maybe we'll both buy all the way back in on Sunday afternoon, and then we won't even have to talk about the draft.
Well, the problem with draft conversation is that you hate every player that ever gets tied to the Bengals. I watched Off the Bench the other day, and every name that got brought up as a possibility, you were like, hate it. Nope, Michael, hate it. Nope, can't draft him. He's terrible.
I like a lot of players, and the players that I don't like, I really hate. I think you're going to learn that as we talk through these. I have a long list of guys I like, but especially in the early rounds, I'm not very flexible with the ones I don't. I've seen the Bengals go away from players that I think are going to be successful time and time again, and they haven't been right, and I have. So I'm sticking to myself this year and going strong on the guys I like and don't.
Well, the ESPN mock draft right now that was put out by Field Yates the other day, which I think you guys already talked about on Off the Bench, but has the Bengals taking James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee. I think that was one of the very few names that you actually liked.
Come on.
Everybody
love
but
James
him.
Pierce. James Pierce is going to be a phenomenal NFL player. I think if the Bengals are able to get him, he's 2 or 3 on my list in the entire draft of guys I want the Bengals to get. So there's a good one. Absolutely love him. Good work, Field Yates. I'm going to have a list here pretty soon when mock drafts start rolling out of analysts I like and analysts I don't based on who they have the Bengals taking, because I'm going to hold grudges if you have us taking Michael Williams. I'll tell you that right now. Absolutely not. But that's enough draft talk. We're still focused on the playoffs.
Michael Williams and Malachi Starks, the 2 names that I see a lot of.
I like Malachi Starks, which goes against my positional value that I've always held on to very, very deeply. But I think a player that makes that much of a difference, instant impact at a lot of different positions, I think Starks would be an exciting player for the Bengals.
All right, well, let's not get too deep on that, and hopefully we don't get too deep into it for another couple of weeks.
Right, that's right. We have plenty of time to talk draft.
That's right.
That's going to do it for tonight's show. Chatterbox Bengals, thank you so much for everyone that watched. We'll be back with you Sunday, kickoff to postgame. I'll stream it all the way through, and then Craig will hop on right after to break down, hopefully, another Bengals win, and then we can go through the playoff machine and get all excited again. I said you win 2 in a row, I'll be back in. So now we're 1 away from getting me all the way back in. And you know how hard that is to do, so that really does mean something. Thank you to everyone who watched tonight. Hoo day.